Welcome back everyone to another reaction video. Well, I saw this video came out about a week ago. It's one of the channels that I'm subscribed to called the Generalist Papers. And they have a new video out called What Happened to the Ancient Wonders of the World. And having just visited the only remaining ancient wonder of the world a few months ago in Cairo, I thought this would be a really interesting topic to cover. And if you would like to go visit the Great Pyramid of Giza with me, we are going back to Egypt in December, doing Egypt 2.0 as we're calling it. It's a group tour. We've got, I think, about 10 spots still available, as well as about that many spots available for our trip to Jordan in February of 2026. And I've got some other group trips I'll be announcing very soon. Would love for you to join us on one of those trips. The links are in the description of all the new videos that are coming out, including this one today, so you can check out those trips, as is the link to the original for this video if you want to check out the Generalist Papers. I want to say a thank you to Ian in Gainesville, Georgia. I think that's where James Longstreet's buried, Gainesville, Georgia. I did a video from there. Ian, thank you so much for your support on Patreon. He signed up just a couple of weeks ago. Could not do this without all our incredibly generous supporters on Patreon. Let's dive into this one. Oh, and I should mention, too, that for those who are on Patreon, I just posted a Patreon exclusive, and I'm going to be posting a bunch of more of those in the coming weeks. I'm working on an album of music, all original songs that I wrote, and uploaded a little preview of one of those today, and I'm going to be doing some more of that in the coming weeks. So, anyway.
Wonders of the world, you might think of these 7 things. Petra, the Northern Lights, the Great Wall of China, etc. And you'd be right to think of these, as they are labeled as wonders of the world.
Petra is in Jordan.
But the original list of 7 wonders referred to something different. These 7 sites all around the Mediterranean. These were...
Yeah, it's funny how we say of the world, but obviously we're talking about what we would kind of consider today the Western world, even though these are all in the Eastern Hemisphere, that kind of Greco-Roman, European, Middle Eastern world that kind of so much of what is Western history is defined by.
The original wonders of the world, now called the wonders of the ancient world. All of these monuments, save one, are now lost to time, destroyed one way or the other. In this video, I want to explore what happened to each of these wonders, what each one can tell us about the ancient world.
Yeah, but are we going to talk about the fact that you have a brain in a jar on your shelf and a skull with an eyeball in it? Skull? Did I say sculf? I guess that's a skull on a shelf. A skull with an eyeball.
And where the idea of these wonders came from in the first place.
Interesting topic.
The 7 wonders of the world started as an idea in ancient Greece. It was mentioned by a number of writers like Herodotus, the so-called father of history, and Diodorus,
the so-called father of history who regularly doctored history. But yeah, I mean, he's still, so much of what we know comes from people like him.
Siculus, another important Greek historian.
Josephus.
Alexander the Great's conquest of most of the Middle East and North Africa in the 4th century BC gave Greek travelers access to new exotic lands like Egypt, Persia, and Babylon. The 7 wonders, or as they were originally called, Theomata, meaning sites, were compiled in these circumstances. There was no established list of wonders in the beginning, however. In the same way a list of must-see sites in Paris will differ from one travel blog to another, different writers compiled separate lists. That said, a few things remained constant.
It's really fascinating to see how some things never changed. I mean, even long before the internet and the world of social media, we had people compiling these kinds of lists. They were like the Watch Mojo of the day. Here's the list of the must-see things in the area that the Greek Empire just conquered.
The number 7 was established quite early, so most lists didn't exceed that number. Also, there were certain wonders that were always included. It wasn't until the Renaissance, surprisingly, that the list we have today was firmly established. And by that point in time, all but one wonder was destroyed. So the list we have today is as follows: the Great Pyramid of Giza, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus, the Statue of Zeus at Olympia, the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, the Colossus of Rhodes, and the Lighthouse of Alexandria. So let's start our journey in chronological order, starting with by far
Pyramids.
the oldest wonder, and the only one still standing, the Great Pyramid of Giza.
I've been inside. It's
The
not
Great
much in there.
Pyramid of Giza is one of the most famous structures in human history. It is by far the oldest wonder of them all, being built in the 2500s BC, during ancient Egypt's 4th dynasty. As you can see, it's shockingly older than all the others.
Yeah, it was ancient by the time any of these other things even came along, which is just nuts when you think about the time period we're talking about. I mean, we're talking about 2,000 years of history. There's as long between the building of the Great Pyramid and all of these other things being built as there is between us and Julius Caesar.
Beating second place by almost 2,000 years. The pyramids are so old that the likes of King Tut and Cleopatra would have thought of them as ancient.
Yeah.
Next to being the oldest wonder, it's
Now, here's a kind of a crazy thing. If you look at this image, you'd be very tempted to think that the middle pyramid, the Pyramid of Khafre, is the Great Pyramid, is the biggest. It's not. The one on the right in this image is the tallest one, is the Great Pyramid. The one that you see a little bit of the limestone casing still is actually the middle pyramid. It's slightly shorter than the one next to it. Just has to do with perspective and the ground level that it's sitting on. It's the same thing if you go to New York City. If you look at the Empire State Building, it actually looks way shorter compared to the buildings around, or the buildings in Manhattan, than it really is, because of just the way it sits on the ground.
also the only one still standing. Really, this makes perfect sense. The pyramids are colossal, human-made mountains, the largest weighing about 6 million tons in all, and standing at an impressive 138 meters high, which is actually shorter than its original height, which was 147 meters.
Missing the top.
The Great Pyramid was actually the tallest man-made structure for 3,800 years.
That is insanity to me, and I knew that was true, but 3,800 years, that was the tallest man-made structure on Earth. Oh my gosh, I mean, just think about that.
Only losing the top spot in 1087 to the old St. Paul's Cathedral in London. Next to its size, it's also the most structurally stable shape you could make, a pyramid. So it's no wonder that it has survived so long.
If you look at the older pyramids, like the original ones that were built before that, and there weren't that many that were built before that one. Originally, they built it as like a mastaba, like, you know, you see a lot of mastabas, which is these kind of rectangular shaped tombs. And then they were like, well, what if we put another mastaba on top of that and another one? And they kind of got the basic idea, and they messed around with it a little bit, and then you got the Great Pyramid.
It was built by Pharaoh Khufu, also called Cheops in Greek, who ordered the building of the pyramid as his tomb. Here's a look at the inside of the structure. Pharaoh Khufu was entombed here, in the king's chamber. The second pyramid was built by and for Khufu's son, Khafre, who is also believed to have built the Sphinx. And the smallest pyramid
and the Sphinx is actually, each one of these pyramids has its own funerary temple, which was like where the king would have been embalmed. It would have been used specifically for his embalming. And we actually went into Khafre's funerary temple, and then next to that temple was the Sphinx.
By Khufu's grandson, Menkaura. The outside of the pyramids were encased in limestone, so the surface used to be smooth. At the top of the pyramid was a capstone that was plated in either gold or electrum, a naturally occurring alloy of gold and silver.
Yeah, he says probably either or, because we don't know for sure. There's a lot of speculation about that.
Years of natural and human-made erosion has mostly removed the limestone casing, and the precious capstone was taken probably hundreds, if not thousands of years ago. The mystery of how the pyramids were built has puzzled people for literally thousands of years, resulting in a myriad of conspiracy theories that range from magic to, of course, aliens. We still don't know precisely how the pyramids were built, but we know they were built by the Egyptians.
And not by slave labor, at least. I mean, that doesn't mean there weren't some slave labor involved, but this was not built by hundreds of thousands of slaves. This was very skilled work, and there were skilled laborers that were involved in it.
Plethora of workable theories as to how the Egyptians cut and moved the stones, the most widely accepted theory being that they used a series of ramps. We do know that they weren't built by slaves, as many still believe. All data points to a large, skilled workforce that was paid for their time. The pyramids have captivated us for millennia, and will continue to do so.
Yeah, incredible.
But we must move along. Come, we need to make an early start for our next destination, across the desert, more than 1,000 kilometers away, in Babylon. The second oldest wonder are the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. These are difficult to discuss because out of all of the 7 wonders, they may not have existed at all. The gardens were supposedly a towering structure of step-like tiers. They were self-watering, meaning there was a complex irrigation system that moved water from the Euphrates River to the plants. They were built, according to ancient sources, by Nebuchadnezzar II as a gift for his wife, Amytis, who missed the lush hills of her homeland, Media.
And that all makes perfect sense within the time period, within the structures that they built. Babylon had some incredible structures themselves, nothing on the scale of the pyramids, but honestly, for ancient Egypt, for most of its history, they didn't build things on the scale of the pyramids. You had kind of a big scaling down after that when you get to things like the Valley of the Kings, but you still have some incredible structures like the Temple at Karnak. And the Babylonians had some equally impressive structures.
The gardens were supposed to mimic these hills. So why are historians so uncertain about their existence? Well, the only sources of their existence are from Greek writers, all of whom never saw the gardens themselves. The earliest source is Josephus, who claims to have heard about the gardens from a Babylonian priest.
Now, Josephus wasn't a Greek writer, though. He lived in first century Judea, which was called by the Romans. He lived in Jerusalem. He lived in that. He was Jewish, and he's actually our source for a lot of things. Now, I will say this. We do have people writing about things that maybe they didn't see themselves, but they had access, just like historians today. Like right now I'm writing a book on the 20th Ohio. And so in order to write my book, I'm referring to other historians' work on topics like the Army of the Tennessee. I've got a book on the Army of the Tennessee that's one of the sources that I'm using. And he, of course, was using earlier sources. And so I'm using his sources of earlier sources and so on and so forth. So you have guys like Manetho, who was an Egyptian who was writing at the time of the Greek conquest of Egypt, but he probably had access to things like the Library at Alexandria and was accessing earlier records, and so he wrote things like the name of the Pharaoh of the Exodus and the name of all the pharaohs for that matter. He referred to all these different things, and he was obviously looking at something else. So just because these guys didn't witness it, that doesn't mean that the sources they had weren't reliable.
Named Berossus, who also told him the story of King Nebuchadnezzar II and his wife. All the other sources are likewise second-hand accounts, though they all claim to be quoting from people who saw the gardens. Also,
Josephus also wrote about things like being aware. He said he never saw Noah's Ark himself, but he knew people who had gone up to see Noah's Ark. So there's a lot of those kinds of stories.
There are no native Babylonian accounts of the gardens, which is a pretty major problem. And to top it all off, there is no archaeological evidence for them either, though some believe they are hidden under the Euphrates River. So if they didn't exist, where did the story of these gardens come from? The earliest lists of these 7 wonders didn't just include the gardens of Babylon, but also its walls. The walls of Babylon were the most impressive walls in the ancient world. According to Herodotus, they were 24 meters thick and 97 meters tall, though he was almost certainly exaggerating.
Herodotus exaggerated a lot, and I really got to believe that's an exaggeration.
It's not clear why later writers discarded these walls from their lists of wonders, but it makes sense that they would have wanted to keep something from the city of Babylon on their lists. Other Mesopotamian cities were known for their gardens, most famously the city of Nineveh. These gardens are well documented, and we have archaeological evidence of them. I think it's very likely that the Greeks who saw these gardens may have misspoke about where they were.
That's certainly a possibility, that when they were referring to the gardens of Babylon, maybe they're not referring to the city of Babylon, but rather the kingdom of Babylon.
Or the people who heard about them misremembered and said they were in Babylon. If the gardens existed, they were built around 600 BC. Obviously, we don't know when or how they were destroyed, but it would have been around the 1st century AD. If the gardens were actually the ones in Nineveh, well, I'll be honest, I couldn't find when those were destroyed either. Control over the city of Nineveh changed hands many times, from the Mesopotamians to the Greeks to the Persians and the Muslims. It seems likely that they didn't exist by the 1st century, though.
Yeah.
Okay, back on the camel, we have another long trek, this time to Asia Minor, to Ephesus. Ephesus was a Greek city whose ruins now lie in the country of Turkey. The people of Ephesus were particularly religious.
The Ephesians.
They were devoted to Artemis, the Greek goddess of the hunt. She was the patron deity of the city, similar to how Athena was the patron deity of Athens.
And there's actually some references in the New Testament of the Bible. And I'm relying heavily on my biblical degree here. But there's a lot of references to how very deeply religious the people of Ephesus were. And Paul actually uses that when he's preaching to them about Jesus.
The Ephesians version of Artemis was somewhat different to the rest of the Greek worlds. The Ephesian Artemis was a sort of mother goddess, representing life and fertility. This was actually very common in the pagan world, where gods and goddesses had very disparate connotations in different places. The Temple of Artemis was actually 3 separate temples, all built after the previous was destroyed. The first temple was built sometime before the Ionian migration, the period when the first Greeks migrated to southern Anatolia, around 1000 BC. So the first temple probably wasn't built for Artemis at all. In the 7th century BC, it was destroyed by a flood. A much grander temple, this one actually dedicated to Artemis, was built in its stead. Unfortunately, it was also ultimately destroyed, not by a flood or any other natural phenomena, but by arson. In 365 BC, a man set fire to the temple and burned it to the ground. Why did he do this? Was it a religious act against the goddess, or perhaps it was a form of political protest? No to both of these hypotheses. He did it, and this is from his own lips, apparently, to be remembered. Essentially, he did it to be famous. For his crime, he was executed, and the Ephesians forbade anyone from speaking his name, as to not give him what he desired.
It makes me want, like, what was it built with? Was it built with wood then, the original, or that second one? Because if it was made of marble, how was it burned down? I mean, obviously it had wood structures, and maybe those burned, I don't know.
Unfortunately, the historian Theopompus and later Strabo
Not
couldn't
a picture
help
of
themselves
Theopompus.
and mentioned his name in their writings. If you want to know his name, you can Google it, but I think I'll abide by the Ephesians' wishes and not mention it in this video.
Somebody obviously
The
mentioned it.
third
We wouldn't
version
know
of
it.
the temple, the one listed as a wonder of the world, was built after the second one's
Incredible.
destruction, and it was one of the grandest Greek temples in history, measuring in at a length of 137 meters and a height of 18 meters. Writers like Antipater of Sidon, whose list of 7 wonders of the world is one of the most famous, wrote that the temple was the grandest wonder of them all. The sheer amount of columns surrounding the temple is an image that still endures in the popular imagination. The temple was severely damaged by a Gothic raid in the 3rd century AD, and it was finally destroyed beyond repair by a Christian mob in the late 4th century. Traditionally, St. John Chrysostom was said to have led the mob, but there's no actual evidence of this.
Come on, John.
The temple's location was then lost for centuries, until it was rediscovered by the British in 1869.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure that much like the mausoleum at Halicarnassus, that there are things from this temple that are in the British Museum. I know they kind of have a little bit of everything there.
By an expedition led by John Turtle Wood. The ruins are now all that's left of this once great temple. Our boats all packed and ready, we have a long voyage to the Greek homeland. Hopefully we get there quicker than poor Odysseus. Olympia was the ancient site for the Greek Olympics. For most of the year, it was a small town with an important temple complex. Travelers from around the Greek world would make pilgrimages to the temple for religious observance. And every 4 years, the temple complex would fill with thousands of people for the ancient Olympic Games.
Accurately portraying them as naked while they run. Good job.
At Olympia was to the king of the gods, Zeus. Inside the temple was a huge statue of the god, measuring over 12 meters high, and this statue is our next wonder. It was built in the 5th century BC by the renowned sculptor and architect Phidias, who also built the statue of Athena in the Acropolis in Athens.
And notice how it's painted. One of the things we often mistake is in thinking that all of these statues were just big white marble statues with no color, and they definitely had color to them. And it's a little creepy, honestly, when you look at the open eyes with the painted color, but that's how they would have looked.
Also built the statue of Athena in the Acropolis in Athens. The statue was made of plates of ivory and gold on a wooden frame. The throne was also made of wood, plated with ebony, ivory, gold, and precious stones. The statue was one of the largest in ancient Greece, so large that some writers, like Strabo, critiqued the statue for being too big for his temple. If he stood up, his head would hit the ceiling. The fate of the statue is actually a bit of a mystery. We know it was still there in the late 4th century during the rule of Emperor Theodosius I.
It's incredible to me that a lot of these ones lasted as long as they did, and I think was it the Colossus of Rhodes or maybe the Lighthouse? One of them lasted up until like the middle of the 2nd millennium AD.
But we don't know if it still stood by the time the temple itself burned down 100 years later. Some legends state that the statue was disassembled and taken eastward. There's no evidence of this, but since we have to head back to Asia Minor for our next wonder anyway, let's follow the legend. We land in Halicarnassus, a major Greek city on the west coast of modern-day Turkey. Halicarnassus was one of the only monarchies at a time when most Greek city-states embraced forms of democracy. It was the birthplace of Herodotus, who we already mentioned at the beginning of the video. Anyway, the mausoleum was built as the tomb for the Carian king Mausolus and his family.
It's where we got the name mausoleum from, Mausolus. Yeah, it's interesting how some of these names that are so a part of our language came from a person like this.
Yep, the word mausoleum comes from the king's name. So this isn't just a mausoleum, it's the mausoleum.
Yeah.
The structure was built by Mausolus' wife and sister, Artemisia II, in 351 BC. Don't worry, most historians think that this incestuous marriage was strictly ceremonial, and the two siblings' spouses didn't have a sexual or romantic relationship. Still, they were clearly close, as apparently Artemisia mourned her brother's death very intensely. Legend says that she even drank some of his ashes with her wine at meals, an image that became a popular subject in Western art. The mausoleum was 45 meters tall and contained over 400 sculptures from some of the finest artisans from around the Greek-speaking world.
And this is going to be an inspiration for things like the mausoleums that were built outside of Rome. They're now in Rome, but at the time they would have been outside of Rome for people like Hadrian and Augustus.
A few of these statues still remain and are housed in, where else, the British Museum. Similar to our last wonder, we're unfortunately in the dark about what happened to the mausoleum. We know it was still standing in the Roman period, but by 1402 it was in ruins, when Christian crusaders took what was left of it to build the nearby Bodrum Castle. We're now sailing away from Anatolia and on to the island of Rhodes.
And that name Colossus is where we get the name for the Colosseum in Rome, because there was a Colossus that was built on that site for Nero. And when they built the Colosseum next to where that statue was, it got nicknamed the Colosseum because it was actually called the Flavian Amphitheater.
The island's entry into the roster is the mighty Colossus of Rhodes, a 33-meter-tall bronze statue of the sun god Helios. The Rhodians built the statue as thanks to the sun god, whom they credited with their survival and victory after a siege by the Macedonian leader Demetrius Poliorcetes. It was built in the 280s BC, and it drew eyes from all around the Mediterranean. Unfortunately, its grandness did not translate to a long life. It only stood for 56 years,
Really?
Until a massive earthquake hit the Isle of Rhodes in around 226 BC,
Sorry, when I said earlier that I thought the Colossus of Rhodes was one of the ones that stood the longest, I had it backwards. It actually was one of the shortest.
Snapping the statue at the knees. It was not rebuilt, as the Rhodians took the earthquake as a sign from the gods, and so left the remains of the statue on the earth where it lay.
It must be the
Even
lighthouse I was
after it
thinking
toppled, there are accounts of people still making pilgrimage to see the fallen Colossus. The pieces of the statue were left for centuries apparently, until later invaders slowly took the bronze as scrap metal, leaving nothing much of it left. Still, the Colossus of Rhodes inspired artists for centuries after. For example, America's own Statue of Liberty, a gift from the French to celebrate the centennial of the U.S.'s independence, was inspired by the Colossus. And so we set sail again, back to where we started, to Egypt. The next and last wonder on our list will serve us well on our maritime journey. Unlike most of the other wonders that served religious or monumental purposes, the Lighthouse of Alexandria was very useful to the coastal city named for Alexander the Great, that quickly became one of the most prominent ports in the Mediterranean and one of the most famous cities, containing Alexander's tomb as well as the famed Library of Alexandria. Situated on the island of Pharos, which is also the ancient name for the lighthouse itself, it was built in 280 BC and was measured 100 meters high. As you may have figured out,
that's massive when you think about it. I mean, a lighthouse that big, I mean, yeah, it was a practical purpose, but it also had a very heavy symbolism attached to it, because you were saying this is a lighthouse for the whole world. This is an important city. It's the capital city that's named after Alexander the Great. It's the place where you can come and learn at the library. It had all of this significance attached to it.
The lighthouse and the Colossus of Rhodes only existed at the same time for about 54 years, meaning those 5 decades and change were the only time someone could have traveled to see all 7 wonders together. Anyway, the lighthouse was the first of its kind. There had been lighthouse-like structures before it in the Mediterranean, but they were nothing more than small stone columns with a fire beacon on top. The light on the Pharos was provided by a furnace, and a large metal mirror that deflected the light of the fire out to the ships to see. It was destroyed over time by 3 successive earthquakes, one in 956 AD, one in 1303, and the last in 1323. After the first 2 earthquakes, the city did repairs, but the final earthquake completely toppled the structure. The stones were later used by the Mamluks in 1480 to build the citadel of Quaite Bay on the site. And with that, our journey is over, with only one wonder, the Great Pyramid, left standing. While most of the ancient wonders are indeed lost to time, their historical significance and impact is still with us.
Yeah. That was good. I enjoyed that. Different topic. I'm not as strong in my ancient history as I am in a lot of other topics, so I got to learn some things there that I didn't know before. Like I said, if you'd love to join me in visiting Jordan or Egypt, the links are in the description. You can click on those and read through the itinerary, look at the pricing, get all the information, and then decide if you have any questions about it. Shoot me an email at vloggingthroughhistory@gmail.com, and I'll be glad to answer those for you. I want to thank Arturo in Compton, California, and Joseph in Bennington, Nebraska, for your support on Patreon. Couldn't do it without you. Thanks for watching.